TV fans, Board now back with you. On this video I'm going to be talking about A Murder at the End of the World, episode 5. The episode is called Crypt. Full spoilers from the start of this review as always, and a really strong episode. Quite a lot happening in this episode. There's some minor details about the case, nothing too substantial, but I guess it's only fair to wait and see how important some of those details are in a couple of episodes' time when we get the finale. But once again, very strong character stuff in this episode. The flashback with Darby and Bill was quite short, but I appreciated what it did, some of the background it filled in when it comes to their relationship. And I think it paints maybe a clearer picture of why Bill might have left her, because we find out more about the addiction that Darby has in this episode. Not just her addiction with, like, finding out the truth, being a private detective, kind of her drive for answers, but also the literal addiction she has with drugs. Well, they're both literal addictions, I guess. I'm just pointing out that the drugs one is a little bit more serious. We've got a hint of that before, but not so much as we get in this episode, and that's why the flashback in the past is quite effective, because it shows Bill being concerned for her, as well as being worried about how fast things are moving when it comes to her pursuing this case, because in the flashback she gets more information and managed to trace the jewelry which has been left at the crime scenes, and figures out then it dates back like hundreds and hundreds of years. So she starts thinking she can, like, track the killer, which she does do at one point. She, like, gets his address, or what she believes to be his address. And this must be the point at which we saw in the first episode, where her and Bill are in his house, and you get that dramatic cut where he comes down after they found the body and, like, shoots at them. So it seems like they're on their way to that location, but Bill is again hesitating, like, no, this is dangerous. Well, what if he kills us? So you see more of that stuff, and it just, as I said, it paints a big picture of Darby's addiction, and I think just a complete shift around, where probably when they met, Bill was the more confident, and maybe he had the bigger passion to pursue this stuff. And again, I think it's one of the clever subversions that this show has done with their relationship, where certainly at first he seemed to be the more dangerous, maybe bold, out there one of the two, whereas in reality it's turned out to be Darby, and it's almost like Bill is a little bit more grounded in, he sort of knows his limits and not when not to push things too far. And it does seem a big reason why he left Darby was because he was worried he couldn't keep up, and he was worried about her getting in too deep and things getting too heavy. So again, there's other ways you could sort of read this. I mean, if it turns out there's a bit of a twist with Bill, and then maybe he wasn't as innocent as he appears. Now, I don't necessarily think that's going to be the case, because I think there's a lot in this to suggest that it's one of the guests, and there seems to be a lot invested in their relationship as at this point. But yeah, it's something that, because there's something in this episode and then points to there being an outside chance that Bill did, like, kill himself, and it's the line he has to Darby in the past, and I think it's a line that's stuck in to purposely make you think about this stuff, because he says, I swear sometimes I think like you only love me if I die. So that has me wondering if it's possible that it is a suicide after all, even though everything that's pointed at us maybe says, no, it's not, there's more going on. But it would certainly make a massive statement if he looked Darby up at this place, decided to confront her, and then commit suicide as like a statement. So I think we're meant to think that is still a possibility because of that line from the past. And the other big thing in the past is then Bill is like, well, when did you find out then you first loved me? And he tells a story about when he realised he first loved her. And she once again has like the shields up and it's like, well, I didn't say I loved you or into you, whatever the phrase was. And she later says it's when I saw you online, when I was on my phone. And I think that's meant to be, I know some people have read that as like a positive almost, like, because there's this ongoing like discussion about the positives and negatives of technologies. I actually read it as a negative just because it just points to her addiction again and how she maybe can't live a natural life outside of the online world. Not that there's anything wrong with like in some ways living your life through the online world, especially if you are quite reclusive and shy. But yeah, I did read that as a bit of a negative, her saying that, but it's another telling line and a great character moment for Darby. So in the present, we do get an answer to why it appears as though Bill is the father, and it's not quite what we were expecting, because Darby questions the nurse first of all. I forget her name now, but sort of questions, well, are you really qualified? And she gives her some vague answers. She also finds out then, it takes some prodding, but she finds out that the morphine that Bill was killed with came from her safe. So it appears as though someone stole it, and that's once again a little bit suspicious. But she goes to Andy earlier in the episode and mentions about Zuma not being his but being Bill's. And the twist is then it appears as though Andy knew about this, but Lee didn't. Because Andy says, I've known for years that I'm infertile, I can't have children. So it's almost like he maybe came to Bill and used him, and he says he's grateful for everything Bill has done, but Zuma will always be his. He loves him, he's raised him, that kind of thing. So the twist is that Andy knows this, but Lee doesn't, because Lee seems taken aback when Darby mentions it later on. So that's an interesting little twist on that. Another exciting part of the episode is Darby and Andy actually teaming up. Like the last two people you thought would team up, because Andy is convinced, makes quite a strong defense of himself and is convinced that someone is out to get him, and one of the guests has an agenda, and they're not only like responsible, but they're trying to make him look like he's the one who did it, like framing him. And there's a great moment with Clive Owen and Andy when because he's starting to get all paranoid. It's like the facade is starting to crack, and he has this moment where like his like butler or his servant, who however you want to say it, comes in and says a guy from the New York Times wants an interview. So it's revealed that the New York Times has found out about like people dying at this place, and Andy just loses. It's like, can't I trust any fucking buddy? And it's like this idea of someone's leaked this stuff, and it's right in front of Darby, and he storms off, and we see Darby react really nervously, but they start working together and continue the investigation, and you get little sort of breadcrumbs, because one of the suspects is David, because he does have this agenda, it seems, against Andy. And at first it appears as though him and Bill don't know each other, but that theory is tested later on. First of all, like, Andy shows Darby this really flash 3D like security software where it actually has a 3D map of like the whole building, so like cameras, and it's another really fun visual moment. But that seems to show that David was in the hallway around the time of Bill's death. And what's funny about that is Andy or Darby, sorry, had the impression he was somewhere else based on her previous like research. And once again, that could point to there being some AI involvement in this, but they question David later on, and he's all very vague and defensive, and he doesn't say a lot, but he reveals that he was with Oliver, who's like the crippled guy. And there's this fun detail with Oliver, like, because he admits and they were together, they were having sex. And it's revealed that he can actually walk, but only a certain amount of distance. So that leaves the door slightly open. He could be involved, or it could be that someone used his wheelchair or his prosthetic legs or something like that, or his crutches. Like they could have used his crutches if they. But it sort of leaves the door open either way, I guess. And the other thing with David is it's revealed that Bill phoned him that night before he died. And Andy and Darby are trying to get it out of David. And he doesn't reveal why he spoke to Bill, because up to now they were under the impression that they didn't know each other. And Darby phones him later on and he's really vague, and then they get cut off anyway, so he's on the defensive. The other thing from this part of the episode is that it's revealed that Lee was having a poker game. Like, there's several of them who were involved in a poker game supposedly, but Lee and Lumaine, the Joan Chang character was, because she features quite heavily in this episode. But they were having a poker game around the time. And she says, or Lomaine that is, says that Lee disappeared mysteriously. And it was sort of in the time frame that Bill would have died. And later on, when she's questioned, Lee reveals then she went to check on Selma. And that's where she was. She also says when she went through the hallway, there was nobody there at that time. So, okay, I'm wondering if it's going to be a bit too obvious it being Lee, because at this point she does seem one of the strongest suspects, and she is acting quite suspicious, but I just wonder if that could be like a big red herring. And we also get, because eventually Andy's had enough with Darby, because he continues to question Lee. And the other thing Darby finds out, well, she catches Lee, is that she has another passport with a different identity. So that definitely points to her being up to something. Maybe possibly her and Bill, because if there was something going on, maybe she intended to leave Andy for Bill or something like that. So there's that side of it, and well, both her and Andy like both dismiss this. But where things get really intense in the episode is the stuff with Darby, where she starts getting like really frustrated and just out of it. Because at one point she gets fed up with Ray and she actually rips him off the wall. And there's been some good suspense over can she really trust this operating system. But as things intensify, she just really, more and more, she's out of it. She's taking more drugs and she's just out of her mind. And I think the tension and the psychology is really good in these sequences. Because it literally feels like... Because Ray says then he or it can't like turn the heat up anymore, and she's hyperventilating. So she's really on the edge of she's going to pass out or something serious is going to happen. And at one point, the stranger breaks into her room and attacks her, like pins her down to the floor. And a very cryptic message, but the message is then, you know, I don't want to kill anybody else, but if you keep pursuing this, I'm going to have to kill you. And it's in like an automated voice, which appears to be female, so that could be a clue then it is a female killer. Although it's possible that just happens to be the gender of like the voice, because it's automated. And that could be a way to throw someone off, like maybe if it is a person, like a man, maybe it's a way to make Darby think it could be a woman. Maybe a way to point suspicion towards Lee once again. But yeah, there's a direct threat to Darby. Another couple of like big interesting scenes. First of all, Darby goes to see Sian in this episode, and she's once again on the verge of death, but she seems to be like recovering very slowly. Eva's the name of the nurse slash nanny, I just remember. But Darby goes to Sian and she says, well, tells her what happened and what she found out about like Bill and Lee, and Bill being Zuma's father. And I mean, you don't get much information here, but Sian reassures Darby, sorry, I keep doing that, reassures Darby then what happened to Bill wasn't your fault, and also says that Andy loves Zuma, but she doesn't know what Lee loves, which, yeah, seems to throw some shade on Lee, again, like almost like Sian is suggesting, then maybe she thinks it is Lee who killed Bill. Or it could just be one of those poignant questions, like, to do with the themes of the show. But yeah, mysteriously, when Eva leaves the room and Darby goes into the bathroom to get some water, I think, not surprisingly, because it's that sort of scene, she then dies, that being Sian. She dies out of nowhere, and it appears as though someone may have hacked her breathing systems or something like that. But because Darby's out of the room at the time, it's not clear exactly what happened. And the other thing, which I think points to this guy could be the killer, and that's with Todd, because later on, when Andy insists Darby is taken back to her room, then Todd has this speech to her about how he lost a brother in the past and how he understands like the need for revenge. And there's just something about that statement and about how on edge he seems in this scene that I think could paint him as a potential suspect, or at least then he knows something or he's involved with something or other. But yeah, that was an interesting scene. And another thought I've had is because it highlights the ring which they've been using to open the doors. It's like the key in this place, and it just cuts to that as he like opens Darby's room door. And yeah, I just wondered, because of the jewelry in the past, if there is some link to that and like these rings that they use to open doors. You get another great visual scene and another meaty thematic scene later on when Darby joins most of the others who are still alive around the fire, and they just have a really nice reflected moment outside, and they're just talking about this whole thing to do with technology and the planet. And because Darby mentions her suspicions, then, well, why has Andy built himself another like bunker, another like place to go and hide, when he's already got this place? and she's suspicious. Then he plans on maybe going and hiding if things get bad with the environment and things go down, and that he could just leave them behind on this retreat. And so that's something that's put out there, and they kind of ponder that. But they're also talking about the age we live in and kind of the contrast between the tech billionaires and the people who are like artists or people who are interested in saving the planet. There's a fun little line from Lomain about the like if the world was ending or we were all doomed because of climate change, then her kid would be too busy on TikTok. So that's another nice little line. The other big stuff, because it's Salma who's out there, Oliver joins, and at one point you've also got the director whose name I can't remember, but they start... I think it's Salma starts getting rebellious because talking about a revolt, like the revolt is coming. And the way she's talking is, it seems to be tapping into some of the stuff around lockdown where people got really paranoid and frustrated with being told to stay indoors. And this idea that this group of artists who, as far as we know, or what they're expressing, is they're on the outside of this. So they're, according to them, are the innocent party compared with like the more like sinister Andy and the corporate types. So there's just this beautiful metaphor about how they're going by coming together around this fire and airing their feelings, how it's almost like they are like revolting, but she's talking about a revolt in the world when it comes to this stuff. So this idea then there are fringe groups and factions who will revolt, and even though they come across as like positive characters in this scene, it comes across as like they are more innocent characters. The stuff she's talking about does bring up more ugly things from the real world. I think it's definitely talking about anti-lockdown protesters, or it's talking more about the more extreme fringe groups who will resort to violence and have a bunch of conspiracy theories, some of which seem really extreme. So it's definitely getting into that, but it's a beautifully shot and acted scene, and they toast everyone who's died so far. And there's just this little pause with Darby where they want her to say Bill's name, and she just has a pause, and there's a beautiful transition using the fire and the air where it goes into another past scene. But one of the reasons she pauses, I think, is because there was a message from whoever the killer is. When she had Darby pinned down, that seemed to... It was a bit cryptic because it was almost implying, like, you won't see Bill again if you continue this, and he's dead. So that's a strange thing to say. Or it mentions about not saying the name, and it also said something about the center. I can't remember the exact word, but I don't know if she was talking about this fire or something, or you could like read it as that. But that's the reason Darby hesitates to say like his name, I think. And so the other big thing, well, the way the episode ends, the cliffhanger is then Darby is like summoned by Morse code. I think it's later after she returns to her room. Oh, actually, one other thing is then there's a beautiful use of the Northern Lights that suddenly comes in at this point. And once again, it's on theme because it's one of these wondrous natural things. Another thing, and it's probably just something which this show has taught me to be aware of, but I did wonder if maybe that could be an AI illusion as well, because I know it's very rare that you get to see the Northern Lights and stuff. It's not like a common thing, even if you live in one of the nearby countries. But that's something that crossed my mind, and it could like just be like an AI type trick. But anyway, yeah, later on when Darby's back in her room, she gets this message from Morse code, and the message is for her to come and meet this person, or yeah, whoever is in the swimming pool or by the swimming pool, and saying she or he'll have some information for her. Now, it seems a bit naive for Darby to come to this because, I mean, I know the person using the Morse code seems, well, he was like, seems to be on the right side, like not the actual villain, but it could easily be a trick as well. But I guess it just shows how frantic Darby is and that she wants answers. But the cliffhanger is she goes to the pool, she goes like inside the pool, and then someone appears, a shadowy figure, and pulls the cover over, and Darby is frantically trying to get out. There's a nice shot of her looking out at this shadowy figure, and like, it's pretty obvious she's not going to die, probably, in many ways. There's still 2 more episodes. I'm pretty sure if Darby dies, it will be in the last episode. But it's a decent enough ending anyway. But it's just one of those. It's a pretty typical sort of, like, cliffhanger, if you like. But anyway, yeah, I've got very little to complain with about the episode. I really enjoyed it. There was some meaty character stuff, a good flashback once again, and some truly suspenseful visual moments. So that's A Murder at the End of the World, episode 5. I will be back with episode 6 review soon, so let me know your thoughts on this one. Like and subscribe as always. And for something really different and more retro, me and Rachel McDonald, my regular co-host, we review the Gilmore Girls. So if you're a fan of that show, we do reviews if you want to check them out on the channel. We're up to season 2. We're nearly halfway through season 2. So if you're a Gilmore fan, Girls fan, and want to check those reviews out, then yeah, you can do now on the channel. Also support me for just $1 a month on patreon.com/borednow, and I'll be back with more TV and film reviews soon. Thanks guys, see you soon.